Okay, are we okay to proceed? Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this briefing event for the Support for SMEs to Evaluate Innovative Medical Technologies competition. My name's Matt Chapman from the health team at KTN, the MedTech lead, and I'll be the MC for today's briefing. And welcome to everybody who's joining online. You may have already been in touch with my colleague, Marcel Kauper, who's leading the webinar and will be passing on any questions that you may have. In terms of the agenda for today, I'm going to give a brief introduction to KTN, for those of you who aren't familiar with us and our role. And then I'll hand over to the Innovate UK team, who'll be taking you through the background to the competition, the scope, the application process, and some of the outcomes from the first round from earlier this year. There'll then be a Q&A session before we break for lunch. If time permits, we'll also try to field some questions at the end of each presentation slot, but we'll see how we progress through the schedule this morning. There will be some further presentations this afternoon, talking about other support that's available beyond Innovate UK and beyond this particular competition, including from NICE, NIHR, and the Academic Health Science Networks. We won't be broadcasting the afternoon session, but with the speaker's permission, we will circulate their slides, so you'll have a chance to refer to all of those after today. So moving on just to the housekeeping for the people in the room. In terms of emergency procedures, there are, I'm told, no planned fire alarms for today. If there are any alarms during the day, then we're requested to leave the building via the doors in the coffee area and around the building to the muster point. But people will be there to schedule us and follow us around. In terms of the facilities, the toilets are just downstairs, out through the main entrance, down a flight of stairs and around to your left. If I can ask everybody to make sure their devices are on silent or vibrate. Hopefully I've done the same, but we'll try to avoid any naming and shaming during the session. And just a point on the webinar. So this morning's session will be recorded. The slides will be published after today as well, so there'll be a chance to refer back to the recording and to the slide sets. Please can I encourage all the speakers and everyone in the audience here today to use the microphone. So even though we can hear each other in the room, the people online may only be able to hear if we use the microphone. So please make sure you use those. Okay, so a quick word about KTN, the Knowledge Transfer Network, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Our role is all about connecting people to drive innovation. So that's helping people find expertise, finding solutions, also finding market applications, perhaps in adjacent sectors, and finding finance to make it happen. We're all about making the future happen faster. We're a network partner of Innovate UK, and we work across the UK and across all sectors to make that happen. And it's all about growth through innovation. So as part of the wider Innovate UK family, our role is to try and help with growth of the UK economy through innovation. How that works? Well, you can attend events such as today's, find out more about funding opportunities, advice and insights, maybe get help with crossing sectors, looking at applications, well, solutions or markets elsewhere, and finding new collaborative partners. And we also get involved in one-to-one support. So there's a range of support, including, for example, access to funding and finance, whether that's grant funding, the subject of today's discussion, or equity, or debt, or whatever's appropriate. We have a European team who can help with accessing European funding, and we have other teams who can help with other issues, including design and sustainability, and embedding those in your new product development processes. There's also a wide range of activities and projects, and you can find details of these on our website. There's a link at the end. But they include landscape sector roadmaps and also special interest groups. For example, we have a special interest group in additive manufacturing, which cuts across all sectors, but is particularly relevant to healthcare. A lot of emerging activity in the UK around that. So that's a very quick run through. Those are the details. I'd recommend you have a look at our free newsletters. Please go and have a look and sign up and get an update every month on the latest initiatives and activities that might be relevant to your company. So that's the brief introduction to KTN. I'm now going to hand over to the most interesting part of the day, which is where you hear about the funding competitions. And at this point, I'll hand over to Ian McKay from the Innovate UK ASHN team, I believe the acronym is at the moment, the health team at Innovate UK. And Ian's going to give you initially the background to the competition.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to come and talk to you today about what is, I think, a very interesting competition, and also interesting because it is slightly different from the normal remit of the support that we've done, and that interest also comes with a degree of complexity. So please forgive me if we labour some of the points. As you'll see when I talk about the lessons learnt from the previous competition, you will understand that it's vitally important that applicants understand what is available under this competition and how it differs from other forms of Innovate UK support. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to give you an overview of the background, a very brief introduction about the Accelerated Access Review, which many of you will be familiar with. I will then talk about the particular priority areas and the eligible product elements of this competition and the options that are available, because there are some different options available. And I will go into more detail than perhaps you would like about state aid rules and Article 28 of the EU legislation on state aid, which is vitally important for this competition so that we're compliant. And then I will talk about some key dates, and in the end of the presentation, after we've heard about the competition application process, I will reiterate those messages by talking about the first round and the key messages that we got from looking at the applications, why people were successful and why perhaps they weren't as successful. So, a few years ago, George Freeman kicked off the Accelerated Access Review. This was a review which was trying to understand why there were barriers to patients accessing innovative medicines and technologies within the health service. What were the problems? How could you accelerate that? How could you make a market for that? And how you could speed up the process of adoption? And the review was published in 2016 and outlined a process for identifying and pulling transformative innovations into the NHS. Now, this was an independent report to government, and it raised a lot of interesting issues. It was very ambitious, and it was a dramatic amount of work. And I can recommend some of the background reports to this. There, in addition to the report itself, there are some very long detailed analysis of different pathways for technology, for medicines, and for the appraisal process, which are very worthwhile, but quite niche if you're interested in these kind of things. A couple of 100 pages each. They're all on their website still. So that was 2016, and it wasn't until November 2017, only just recently, that the government published its formal review. And this was because they wanted to work through with their partners to look at all the different mechanisms by which you could facilitate the recommendations in the Accelerated Access Review. Now, I'm not going to set out and describe any of the recommendations, barring one of these, which is around a call for specific support for developers of medical technologies to be able to gain real-world evidence. And that's what we're talking about today. This is what this particular competition is focused on, just one small element of this. And of course, the Accelerated Access Review and that whole drive towards adoption and development is also picked up again in the industrial strategy and the life sciences sector deal, which talks specifically about the adoption of the recommendations in the Accelerated Access Review and talks about the creation of accelerated access collaboratives and other mechanisms by which innovation can be drawn into the NHS and how that adoption process will be sped up. We don't have time to talk about all that today, but what I will point out is that this tranche of funding that we're talking about today was announced in July as part of a wider package of £86 million to support adoption of technologies. And this is just a small element of that, £6 million around the development of real-world evidence. So this is the second round of the competition. We ran the first competition in earlier this year, and I will talk to you at the end of the session around what we've learnt from that. But specifically, the aim of this competition is to allow companies to gain support to collect and analyse clinical performance and cost-effectiveness data in a clinical setting, in an NHS setting. It will facilitate the adoption process, and one of the key elements of this is asking you to link, the applicants to link to the appropriate support mechanisms, whether that be NHS England, whether it be the Academic Health Science Networks, or NICE, to make sure that the evidence collected is not only effectively collected, but it's valuable and is the type which will support the adoption process. And that's an important element. It's about making sure that. So over and above even the support network, one of the aims of this competition is to foster that connectiveness and make allow SME developers of these products to see where those support mechanisms are. And that's what we'll be exploring in more detail in the afternoon session. There are a great deal of support mechanisms out there, and we should be using those whenever possible to support the adoption of these technologies. So in this particular round, there's 1.5 million of funding available, and that's funded through the Office of Life Sciences. And that's funded specifically against the Accelerated Access Review. And I just want to spend a couple of moments talking about how that fits within the UK as opposed to the national, as opposed to the devolved administrations, because I think there's been some complexity and some misunderstanding. So the Accelerated Access Review was designed, I think, to confuse in terms of how we divide up different elements between the UK and the different nations of the UK. So Accelerated Access Review looked at the entire patient pathway from regulation all the way through to delivery in the clinic. Those elements of the pathway which are adopted at a national level were considered at a UK-wide level, like regulators, the MHRA for example, are considered at a UK-wide level. So the implication of the AAR, it has a UK implication. Where the clinical pathway, and this would be in this particular instance around the adoption within the health service, applies to something which is around a devolved element, it applies to England only. Now, we are Innovate UK, and I want to make it clear that we will support companies applying to this fund from across the United Kingdom, but the aim of the competition is around supporting adoption against priority areas established by NHS England. So we need to make it clear that even if you wish to carry out the study elsewhere in the United Kingdom, you need also to apply for those aims. Now, that's not too restrictive. As you'll see, the priority areas for NHS England are not very restrictive and probably common to healthcare across the UK. So I'm happy to answer questions if that's not clear on that element, because it's an important element as to what we can do. So all the applications to this process and this mechanism must be business-led. And in fact, we're really looking for single applicants here. You can work with others, but the support is specifically available for SMEs. So there won't be any separate grant claiming through other academic organisations or research organisations under this. And there are two elements of support. There is funding, and this is around, and we'll come, I'm sure Laura and the competition team will touch on the distinction between grant and total project cost, but we will start by saying that total project costs of up to £50,000 are supported for study planning and preparation. So you can work with the relevant organisations, for example NICE or other organisations, and you can develop a detailed study plan. And for that level, you're allowed to, the total project cost must be less than £50,000. There's no minimum on this, but obviously there's a cost-effectiveness ratio for filling out all our forms. And then for the larger studies where you've got your plan and you want to actually implement that and you want to take that forward, working with partners, the total project cost can be up to £250,000. Now, I know that some people will have technology which £250,000 is not sufficient to develop that. Unfortunately, if you do have a product which requires a multi-year study or evaluation program which would cost significantly more than that, this scheme simply cannot support you, and I'm afraid that will be out of scope for our competition. But there are many pieces of technology where we think we can develop valuable amounts of evidence within that £250,000 project limit. And in fact, the fact that we've had a number of really good applications to the first round would say that there is possibilities within that budget. We are very strict on our timescales for when we wish projects to start. So anyone applying to this round should be in a position to start that project by the start of the new year, on the 1st of January. And projects must last less than 12 months or less. It's very important, and I'll explain why that is a little later on. So, eligible products. Now, in the original press release in July, there was a mention of medicines in this. Medicines are not in scope, And if you see medicines, I'm afraid I have to be clear, they are out of scope for this particular competition. There'll be other forms of support and other mechanisms being considered around that. This funding is restricted to medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, and regulated digital healthcare products. We insist that the product is effectively finished and completed and fully developed. That is, it's gained its CE marking. So the development process must have been completed and the product must be available for sale. You can be selling the product in the UK at the moment, but you mustn't have been selling it in the UK for more than 5 years. So you've got a product which is finished, you can go and buy it. It's very important. We had a lot of confusion about CE marking and digital devices. I understand that in some instances, manufacturers or developers of digital products don't feel that CE marking is appropriate. In this round of the competition, we will be looking for CE marked digital products. I know that there are other mechanisms for approval, but in this competition, we will be insisting on a CE marking for those products, which is possible. The other element is we're not looking to support products which won't have a very small impact, and I'm sure most developers will have no problem in being able to explain the significant potential impact of their product were it to be adopted throughout the healthcare. So we're looking particularly at two elements, one about improved patient outcomes, but also potential savings or streamlining of service delivery. So really we're looking about important impact. As I said, we don't want to support products in every sphere. We think that there are too many medical devices potentially out there, and the NHS England have defined discrete priority areas, although I must say these are extremely broad priority areas. And the priority areas are set out in the next steps of the NHS 5-year forward view, and the link is on the slide here. This is just a summary of these. There's more detail in the full publication, but I would think you would agree that these are not incredibly prescriptive or narrow definitions. So we're looking at reduced cancellations or unnecessary appointments in primary care. We're looking at reducing the burden on A&E services, avoiding harm or improve patient safety, improve diagnosis, either lower cost or more accurate diagnosis, and supporting the management of long-term conditions. And there are a range of conditions which are specifically indicated, like for example, including COPD, diabetes, and a number of other conditions. There are further details in the forward view, but I think most people will be able to find an area where their device would probably be able to match against that. And we'll be looking for applications to clearly articulate how their product matched against those priority areas. If you have a device which can't be mapped against those, I'm afraid we can't support that under this competition. So as I said, products need to have a significant impact. So we need an estimate of the cost, of the value of the saving or the impact on the patients. If you've got some evidence of your clinical performance or your cost effectiveness, you may have started some preliminary studies but need more to push that adoption process. This is where you should be telling us. We insist that the companies have started to work with the relevant partners, and we have teed up the relevant partners to be expecting you to be in touch with them. So NICE, NHS England, the National Institute of Health Research or the Academic Health Science Networks should all be waiting and expecting your call. We'll be looking, if you're looking at actually collection of data, we're looking at actually how you're going to facilitate that you've had a realistic approach to the adoption of that within a clinical environment. So it's not we're just going to go and collect something, but how and who have you spoken to, and does it work within the clinic, and is it going to be effective in terms of the data that you collect for performance evaluation? What parameters would NICE like to see around your device or medical or product which will allow to support the adoption process? And if you've got studies on cost and benefit, that value proposition, spelling out that value proposition for your product, again, it's really clearly articulating in your application what benefits your product will bring should it be adopted. Because we're offering you support to make these, we need you to understand clearly what the evidence gaps are. So if you've not started that project selection or you've done it in part, we need you to have worked with the relevant organisations, particularly using perhaps a gap analysis, a meta tool, and we'll hear about that in the afternoon. NICE has one tool, but there are a number of other providers who will look at your product and do a gap analysis of the evidence that you have. We want to be evidence. You want to be able to demonstrate that your plans and your projects are going to evidence the impact. And you want to expand the evidence data. So you might have some. It's important to say you might have already got some preliminary evidence which has gained your CE marking and has been preliminary testing. This is about what value the additional evidence that you collect will do. We're particularly interested in any breakthrough or disruptive technologies. So if you've got a device which you think is going to transform patient care, please, this is the kind of thing that will really be the one we want to support. And similarly, we want to be able to see how it will work within the wider healthcare system. We must get away from seeing the products working in isolation and away from the full clinical pathway. So I said we'd talk about state aid. This competition, most Innovate funding supports the innovation process, i.e. before the product has been finished. It is unusual for us to support companies which have already completed that innovation process. And so in order for us to be compliant with state aid rules, we have to use a different mechanism. And you'll all learn to this morning that it's actually Article 28. Now, there's a detailed state aid manual, and page 41 of that state aid manual provides further details of the state aid rules. But this allows us to provide support to SMEs directly up to 50% of the eligible costs around supporting that innovative product development. And this is around that adoption process, the evidence database collection. Unlike other grant schemes that we run, support is always at 50%, and it doesn't vary between different cost bases. You can't claim 70% for one or 30% for another. Now, I know that sounds simplistic, but as you'll see later on, we need to get that message into the application so we don't weed them out. There are ineligible costs in this competition which are unusual and different. So you can't buy things. You can't pay for instruments, equipment, or materials through this. You might say, well, what's the point? Well, what you can do is you can pay for personnel, and and I should just point out, this is the entire legislation, this piece, which you won't be able to read. But the state aid manual has pages which describe this in more detail and explain exactly what's interprets this legislation. But there are two categories under which you will be able to claim funding. One is around secondment of highly qualified personnel. Now, that may be secondment from one organisation to another or an internal secondment. Now, you're going to say highly qualified. What do we mean? Well, we mean postgraduate. We need someone who's got significant experience in the area, not a new trainee, and you evidence the qualification of your personnel internally. So we would ask you to be able to justify that in case someone comes after you for the state aid money. So if you've got someone who's got 2 PhDs and a doctorate and a master, that would be fine. They would count. Similarly, eligible costs also include costs of innovation advisory and support services. So this could be a fee for service from NICE, for example. That would be an eligible cost, or another provider, or someone who was providing a similar level of support. I can't emphasise enough how confusing this might be, so please do check, read, have a look at the state aid manual, read the legislation, but I suggest the state aid manual is probably easier, and ask for advice, and I'll be showing you how you can specifically ask for advice at the end. So it's really important. Now, one other thing I'd just like to mention here, you might see some different figures. Those of you can probably squint at the bottom here. There are two figures for support. One says 50%, that's the one we're doing. There is also the last bit here, which says 100%. We're not doing that one. We are not doing this because that comes into a whole range of problems. So with the system that we're doing, we can provide 50% support against eligible costs at a limit of 5 million euros per company per project. I don't think anyone's going to hit that limit using this competition, even with multiple applications. The 100% limit is under de minimis rules, which is 200,000 euros over 3 years. It's horribly complicated. We're not going to go there. Legally we could, but we are not exploring that in this competition. So, just to reiterate, competition, as you know, has opened yesterday. It closes at noon, and this is a message that you'll hear again from our competitions team on the 22nd of August, and we'll tell you whether you've got the funding on the 2nd of November. You should look at the competition brief, which is available on the Innovate UK website. And if you're unsure, now you can email me directly, but it would be much better if you email our support service in case I'm on holiday, sunning myself somewhere, and they will chase the relevant teams to provide detailed support, whether that's through the competitions team or whether that's someone who's an expert on state aid rules. One final last comment is if you feel that this competition's come too soon and the deadlines aren't working for you, this is one of a number of rounds of competitions. We will be running more competitions, probably later this year. I haven't got the dates to absolutely confirm, but it's definitely something that we have in the scope. So don't feel that this is your only chance to apply for funding. So I don't know if we have any questions.
Thank you, Ian. We're a little ahead of time, so we do have time to field any questions if anybody has any. We do have roving mics for people in the room. If there aren't any burning questions in the room, I'll look to Marcel at the back to see if we have any questions from online. No, nothing at the moment. So obviously everything's very clear in terms of the way it's presented. Ian, perhaps... Oh, sorry. If you just bear with us a second, I'll just get the microphone.
Thanks for the information. You mentioned a 12-month maximum period to collect this data. Have you defined what that 12 months mean? Is that from start, like first patient in and last patient out? Or is it from the point that they use the device and you can follow that patient on for a year?
So it is the 12 months simply refers to the duration of the project. So the projects must start by the 1st of January, and they've got to be finished by December. So we're not looking at any projects which last longer than that. And I appreciate that will limit some, as I mentioned, there will be some evaluation projects which lie outside this, and unfortunately we can't support those within this current scheme.
Hi, my name is Hagar from Bluethink. For the total project cost, it says that there was a limit. Does that include the ineligible costs or not?
It would be good to know about the ineligible costs, but obviously many of these projects you will be able to provide. The company might provide the device for free, for example. So I think you have to work it. If you want to tell us about the ineligible cost, that's good, and that would be very transparent, particularly if you've got sources of funding, other sources of funding which you're using. But in many cases, people have the devices and they'll say, well, we'll just, it doesn't cost us much to make them, or they're already in the clinic. This is just allowing people to collect that money. So it will be a project-dependent one. But if you put them down, you will count against the limit.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm wondering, so some products that depend on data, say an algorithm, obviously sort of requires the data collection first before the product is created. So what if you have a product that's able to collect that data? Is that eligible, or do you need sort of more the final algorithm to have a product?
So the question would be, have you got a product which you can sell today?
Okay, understood. Okay, that makes sense.
I've got two questions, kind of related, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The first one is, can the clinical study be a multi-site, multi-condition study, or does it just have to be one?
You have to be, and I'll come on to this at the end, is you have to be realistic about what you can achieve with the money available in the time. So, an assessor will look at that and go, yes, this is great, and it's really exciting, but it's hopelessly ambitious. What are you going to get completed in the time? So that would be my only, the more complex, the more difficult it will be, the longer it will take you to get it set up. If you're very confident that you can do that, then that's great. But we will be quite unforgiving if you don't get started on time.
And the second question is, do we have to engage formal clinical trials units to manage a study?
So these are not clinical trials. These are this is evaluating a product in a real-world setting. But clearly, you want to be able to engage with the appropriate personnel who are used to that kind of data collection.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Andrew Cowan, Future Care UK. We're into health tech, wearable devices and disruptive processes in delivering healthcare through the high street. Being a dyslexic, process is not my forte, certainly looking through funding criterion and the rest of it. I've written to KTN to ask for assistance in looking at the different Innovate initiatives going on to disseminate the granularity of what we're doing into the different funding streams and whether we should or we shouldn't, because I've already received 100,000 from Innovate to develop the infant wearable that we currently have a prototype with. We need to make it move it further. So my question is there someone in Innovate who I can sit with for half an hour, go through what I think is available, where I think it applies, and then whether or not it's feasible that I make the application based on the fact that I've already received 100,000 from you already?
I think there's always opportunities to engage with us, and I think that's a conversation we can have today or at another time.
Fantastic.
It may not be with me, depends which particular bits of technology you want. We have a whole variety of funding streams available, and I would draw everyone's attention to our new model of funding around open competition. So if you've got a product which is in the development stage and you're looking for funding, we now have a rolling set of open competitions which are distinguished by the fact that everything is in scope as long as it's an innovation focused project.
Thank you. I'll have that conversation with you offline. Thank you.
If there aren't any more questions, I'll step away from the speaker. Ian, I did have a couple. They may be picked up later. One was around your slide about Article 28. There was a reference to secondment of staff. Is there any particular import to that word, or?
It's simply around the fact that you are paying for the staff to place on this particular project, and I think that's the key element. So if it's an internal secondment, obviously it gives you some more flexibility. It doesn't have to be a full-time individual. You've got more options to put them as a fraction of an FTE. So I think that's the only element.
Okay. I guess I might normally assume a secondment is between organisations.
Yes,
in this case, it would be internal.
It could be
resources.
internal. That's definitely.
And the other question around eligible costs was about subcontracts. So I think you mentioned the preference or the emphasis was on single SMEs, that they could work in partnership, but that partner organisations wouldn't be funded. Could you just be clear on subcontracts?
So they would be eligible to those costs could be subcontracted if you can show that they are aligned with the eligible costs in terms of evidence collection or analysis. And I understand that there may be some partner companies who would be eligible, but they wouldn't be a grant claiming partner.
Great, thank you, Ian. And Marcel informs me there's a question from online as well.
Yeah, I'm relaying a question from Darren Kell. And his question is, would a CE-marked device used for a different clinical indication, so not covered by the CE mark, be eligible?
No. No, because you couldn't sell it. The whole aim is to have a product which you can sell for the application that you want to use, because otherwise we're in a product development scope. So I understand why they would ask that.
Okay. I think we've picked up on all the questions so far. So thank you very much, Ian. I believe we'll now hand over to the Innovate UK competitions team.
Yeah, so it's just that one. That one. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Laura Thomas, and I'm joined by my colleague Julie, and we're from the competitions team at Innovate UK. So the agenda for our session, so I'm going to talk to you about the eligibility criteria, the application process on our innovation funding service. Julie will then, I'll then hand over to Julie. She'll talk to you about the application finances, how to submit your application, the assessment criteria, and what happens if you're successful, and then we'll have another Q&A at the end if we need it. Okay, so just really going over what Ian's already said. So in terms of the eligibility for option 1 and option 2, the lead must be a UK-based SME. You must have a medical or diagnostic device or a regulated digital health product with a CE marking that has been marketed for less than 5 years. You must carry out your project within the NHS, and you must have a product that's aligned with the specific priority healthcare areas as defined in the next steps on the NHS 5-year forward view. For option 1, project costs are up to £50,000, and for option 2, up to £250,000. And as Ian's already said, projects must start by the 1st of January 2019 and finish by the 31st of December 2019. So for this competition specifically, SMEs can only submit 1 application to this round of the competition. And if your application is unsuccessful, you can use the feedback that's received to reapply for the same project, either into another round of this competition or another competition. If you have an outstanding final claim and independent accountant report or IAR on any live Innovate UK project, you'll not be eligible to receive any more grant funding in this competition as a lead or a partner organisation. And if you've applied to a previous competition as the lead or sole company and rewarded funding by Innovate UK, but did not make a substantial effort to exploit that award, we will award no more funding to you. Okay, and these are some of the key dates for this competition. So as Ian's already said, the competition opened yesterday, and the briefing event is what you're receiving today. The submission deadline is noon on the 22nd of August, and that is a hard deadline. So if you do have any problems when you're submitting your application through our Innovation Funding Service, please do contact us before the deadline, as anything after the deadline we can't help you with. And applicants will be informed on the 2nd of November. Okay, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Innovation Funding Service. So hopefully most of you will be familiar with this service by now. It's been running for just over a year. But if you haven't applied into us before, then I'm just going to go over a few bits for you. So our users are all over the world, and IFS will help them to collaborate with their project partners wherever they are. This map on the slide there shows you the location of IFS users for the period July 2017 to May 2018. And as you would expect, the majority are from the UK, but the next largest number is in the US, followed by China, India, Colombia, and Germany. Okay, so when you click Apply on the competition webpage, you'll be directed here. You'll then need to use the keyword search to find the competition you're interested in, click on the link, and then it opens the competition for you. You can then click on the competition to see a tabbed view of the eligibility criteria, the scope, the key dates, and information on how to apply. And when you're happy that you want to apply for this competition, simply click Start New Application. To apply for the competition, the lead applicant will need to create an account. But if you've applied for a previous competition with us, then you already have an account, so you can simply sign in using this. And you can use Companies House Lookup to search for your organisation to save typing in the name and address. But if you're not on Companies House, you can manually enter this information. So once you've logged in, you'll get this view. And from here, you can set up your consortium and your team members. And those team members are other people from your organisation who will be working on the application with you. Collaborators are your partner organisations on the project, and you can invite participants by entering their name and their email address. IFS will then invite them automatically via email to create an account and join your application. You'll be able to invite these people to help you with your application by assigning questions to them, and any collaborative partners will be responsible for entering their own costs. The application overview allows you to see details such as the competition title, the application deadline, the progress bar, and grant terms and conditions. When completing your application, you can assign questions to other people in your organisation or a partner organisation to complete or edit the answer. They can then assign the question to somebody else for their additional input or mark as complete. There are some key features of IFS in that you can now spell check and format your answer, and you're able to view your word count limit and, importantly, able to see the online guidance when answering the question. We do ask that you avoid including any hyperlinks within your answers, as assessors will not be able to follow them. Okay, so here you can see the application form layout. The application form itself has 3 sections that you'll need to complete, and these are project details. This is unmarked, but the key to setting the scene for the assessors are important. Application questions, which obviously are marked, and your finances, which are just an overview taken into account in the assessment process. So the first section you'll need to complete are the project details. And within this, there is the application details. So we will ask you to select a research category, but this won't be relevant for this competition, and it doesn't obviously affect the amount of grant that you can receive, which is a maximum of 50%. The project summary, so you'll highlight the need or the challenge, the approach and innovation, and the outcomes. And this is key to setting the scene for the assessors. So obviously very important, as it gives them an overview of your vision. And then the public description. So this will be published if your project is successful. So obviously please be aware of confidentiality here. And scope. So it's important that your project is within scope to receive funding. So you'll need to use this field to justify how your project fits the scope for the assessors. And if you're unsure as to whether or not your application is in scope for the competition, please contact customer support, and that will go through to Ian. So this is what the application question looks like. So 10 questions. And covers 3 key areas, which we'll run through in a bit more detail over the next slides. And these questions can be found under the How to Apply tab on IFS. Very detailed guidance is associated with each question on IFS, so you can look through this at any time. And questions 2, 3, 7, and 8 allow for appendices. Okay, so question 1 is around need or challenge, and here you need to provide evidence of the potential for your product to have a significant impact on patients or the efficiency of care delivery by the NHS. And when the product was first marketed in the UK as only products, sorry, I think that's wrong. If you're applying for option 1 funding, you'll need to explain or justify why the study planning and preparation funding is necessary for you to keep developing your product, giving details of any gap analysis you've carried out into the clinical performance and cost effectiveness of your product. If you're applying for option 2, show that you've performed an initial product evidence gap analysis using the NICE meta tool, a comparable approach, or other product-specific advice. Question 2 is around the approach and innovation. So what are you doing in your project, and how is this an improvement on what already exists? So explain how you propose to address the need, challenge, or opportunity identified. If you're applying for option 1 funding, tell us how you'll use the funding to develop and execute plans for data collection. And describe how you plan to contact and work with relevant stakeholders, including NICE, NHS England, NIHR, and AHSNs. If you're applying for option 2 funding, describe what work needs to be carried out during the study and why, and describe how the study data will be collected and analysed. And for this question, as I said, you can submit an appendix. Question 3 is around team and resources. So here you'll need to describe the project team, explain why you and any partners are the right people for the job. Assessors will be looking to see that you have the right skills, the experience and access to facilities. So who's involved in what role and why them. So you'll detail the roles, the skills and the relevant experience of all members of the project team in relation to the approach to be taken. Again, question 3 allows for an appendix. Question 4 is market awareness. So how well do you understand the market you are or will be operating in? You'll need to specify the market you'll be targeting the project and any other potential markets. For the target market, describe the size of the addressable market, the structure and dynamics of the market, and the main supply value chains and business models in operation. Question 5 is outcomes and route to market. So what is the impact of your project on your business and consortium? Describe your target customers and or end users and the value proposition to them. And describe or explain how you use the project's clinical data, how you plan to develop the product further after your project is complete, your current position in the markets, and your target customers and value to them. For example, why would they use your product or buy it? Question 6 is wider impacts. So what are the wider impacts of your project outside your project team? Summarise the anticipated benefit of your product for one of the clinical operational areas listed in the competition scope. What are the economic benefits from the project to those outside the project? Highlight the expected social and/or environmental impacts, either positive or negative, and explain any expected regional impacts of the project. Question 7 is project management. So here you'll have to outline the main work packages of the project, indicating the relevant research category, the lead partner that's assigned, and the total cost of each work package. Describe your approach to project management and the management reporting lines, and outline your project plan in sufficient detail to identify any links or dependencies between work packages or milestones. And for question 7, you can upload a project plan or a Gantt chart in PDF format. Question 8 is risks. So identify the key risks and uncertainties of the project, including the technical, commercial, managerial and environmental risks. Explain how these will be mitigated, and list any project inputs on the critical path to completion, such as resources, expertise or data sets. And are the outputs likely to be subject to regulatory requirements, certification, ethical issues, etc.? And if so, how will you manage these? And again, an appendix for this question, you can upload a risk register. Question 9 is around additionality. So tell us if this project could go ahead without public funding, and if so, what difference would the public funding make, such as faster to market, more partners, reduced risk, etc. Describe the likely impact of the project on the business of the partners involved, and why you're unable to wholly fund the project from your own resources or other forms of private sector funding. And finally, question 10 is around cost and value for money. So assessors are looking to see that your project is reasonable and good value for money. Explain how the partners will finance their contributions to the project. Explain how the project represents value for money for you and the taxpayer, and how does it compare to what you would spend your money on otherwise. You'll also need to tell us how you will finance the 50% contribution to the project, how you will cover any costs, such as materials costs, that are not covered under Article 28, as listed on page 41 of the State Aid Manual, how this project represents value for money for you and the taxpayer. Oh, sorry, I've just said that. And then any subcontractor costs and why they're critical to the project. Okay, and now I'm going to hand over to Julie, who's going to take you through the finance section. Okay, it's just that one now.
Okay. Hi. Okay, the finance section has 3 parts to complete. Each organisation is responsible for completing their own finances. So all the sections must be completed before each partner can mark as complete. The sections will vary dependent on whether you're a business or academic. The academic page will be different. The sections you need to complete are your project costs, your organisation and your funding. So we'll now go through each of these. So, any organisation not completing a GES form will need to complete the project costs using this form. There are 5 eligible cost categories that each organisation needs to complete. Please ignore the materials and capital uses sections. These are the ones that are highlighted in red, as these are ineligible for this competition, as Ian's already gone through. As a reminder, the project cost guidance is available online. Please familiarise yourself to what is eligible for each category, and if you do have any questions, please contact the competitions help desk or the customer support email address that we're going to give you shortly. Okay, these are the eligible costs for this competition. So it's quite detailed, so I'm going to read it all through. So it's the cost of obtaining, validating and defending patents and other intangible assets. It's a comment of highly qualified personnel from a research organisation or large enterprise working on research, development and innovation activities in a newly created function within the beneficiary, not replacing existing personnel. Costs of innovation advisory and support services, including consultancy and training in the areas of knowledge transfer, acquisition, protection, exploitation of intangible assets, use of standards and regulations, embedding them in the quality labelling, testing and certification for the purpose of developing more effective products, processes or services. That's a lot of information. So all this information will be available online, as we said. Okay, so looking at the eligible costs, labour costs. Here we'd just like you to enter the role, the gross annual salary, the number of staff and the days to be spent working on the project. It will then automatically calculate the total costs. If you have any multiple people in the same role on the same average salary, enter this in the role within project field. If an employee is part-time, You should enter their costs as full-time equivalent. You can adjust the working days per year from the default if this is different from your project. Please note that dividends, bonuses, non-productive time cannot be included within your labour costs, or they are ineligible. When making grant claims against labour costs, actual costs claimed should be supported with timesheets. Okay, overheads, quite complicated slide this one. So we do define overheads as additional costs and operational expenses incurred directly as a result of the project. These should include additional costs for administrative staff, general IT, rent and utilities. You can select from the three options you can see on the screen how you would like your overheads calculated. We class indirect, which is the administration overheads, as those costs associated with the back office functions such as finance and HR, whose primary function is to support the running of the business. They can only claim a portion of their time, and their work needs to be additional to the delivery of the project, not business as usual. Typically, these costs are not directly related to the particular product or service production. So I said, excuse me while I just scroll down a little bit to get the next bit. Direct overheads are costs associated with staff working directly on the project. For example, laptops, desks, office facilities. We supply a simple form into which you can list each of these type of direct overheads together with the methodology and basis of apportionment for this particular project. Again, these overheads would not be incurred if the project did not happen. Okay, subcontractors, as we mentioned, you can subcontract. If the cost is going to be significant, then you'll need to justify who, why, and what you need them for, both here and in your application form. It's important that you do justify the use of subcontractors within your application, especially if you use any that are not UK-based, as the assessors do not see this type or this level of financial information. They only see the total cost. So you need to make sure in your application you're clearly stating why you are using them. If you do use a parent company or a sister company, please ensure you list a cost and don't include any profit. Okay, travel and assistance. Here you would include things such as any essential meetings that need to happen during the project. You cannot include any sales or marketing activity, as this is ineligible. Travel costs must be economy travel only. You should be prepared to provide a breakdown of these costs if the project finance reviewer asks you for more information. For example, they might require you to split a trip into subsistence, accommodation and travel components. Okay, other costs. So here, this is any other costs that don't fit into the previous categories. You can check the finance guide for what costs can actually be incurred here. If you're unsure, please do not hesitate to contact our customer service department again. So this could be for things like training, directly attributable to the project, licensing new technologies, or patent filing costs. But please ensure there's no double counting and that all the costs are justified. Once you're happy that all your project costs have been added to the system, you'll be given a final opportunity to review. You will also need to confirm the costs you have included are eligible as per the project cost guidance, and then mark this section as complete. As you can see, there's a little red box there. A lot of people forget this. You must mark that as complete. It doesn't mean to say that you can't go back and review it. As long as you haven't submitted your application, you can go back and review as many times as you like. But to make sure that, so everything else sort of adds up, you need to make sure that you mark as complete as you go along. Okay, finances. We're now going to look at your organisation section for the finances. You can see here on the screen the information we ask you to provide. The other information helps with our financial viability checks if your application is successful. If you're a recent startup company who hasn't yet had a financial year, you can input zeros. If your application is successful, you will need to be registered on Companies House before any funding is released. So here we're asking you for organisational size, the date of your last financial year, a number of full-time employees, etc. Okay, so now we're going to quickly look at your funding section on the finances. Okay, just to make it very, very clear, this competition is completely different than any other competition that we have run, and so does not follow our normal state aid rules. We cannot stress that enough. So the maximum grant you can claim is 50%. This will need to be manually adjusted in your funding section. Failure to apply for the correct grant will make your application ineligible, so this is really important to remember. So I'll show you where. As you can see here, we've got the slide here where it says enter your funding level. In that section there, you must enter the 50%. Okay, So there's no conditional offer letter with this new process, this new IFS process, which is why it's important that each organisation accepts and acknowledges the T's and C's as they're going through the application. The funding will ask you to confirm the amount of grant funding that you require up to a maximum of 50%, as we've stated, while IFS will tell you the maximum you're eligible to receive. Some people might want to choose less. Other funding, if you do have any other public sector funding that you're receiving for this project and this project only, you need to put that in the box there and say yes, as it will need to be deducted from the total amount of funding you're eligible to receive. Okay, other public sector funding. So here, like we've said, you need to tell us if you have received any other public sector funding, but I cannot stress this enough. A lot of people get confused. It's only for this project and this project only. You need to declare it here. If you've received funding for previous work that has led to this project, that does not need to be listed, as I've just said. Any funding that you've received will be taken off your grant funding allowance. Okay, before submitting your application, you are able to view the financial overview. This page states the funding rules for the competition. You can see there the red box or the sort of middle of the page. So please check that your total project costs are within the eligible costs that are detailed there. We cannot stress enough that your total project costs must be within the published eligible amounts rather than the funding sought. A lot of people get confused and think, say, 500,000, that is the amount of funding I'm allowed. No, it's not. The 500,000 is the amount of total project costs you can have. You're entitled to 50% of that, so you'll only be entitled to the 200, or what was that? 25, sorry, trying to confuse you. 25,000, so half that. So your total project costs, that's where you've got to make sure you fit, and your funding sought will be 50% of that. Please make that distinction, because an awful lot of applications are ineligible because of that point. Okay, non-grant claiming partners. As only the lead can claim funding on this competition, any partners in the application will have to select the Not Requesting Funding tab, and the system will automatically update, greying out the other sections as they won't need to be completed. So we'll go on to submitting your application. This is the summary of the project costs available to all the organisations in the project. You'll not be able to see any more detail other than this. So you're able to go down into your own. You can have a look through your own, but you won't be able to view anyone else's. This is also what the assessors will see. So it's, what am I saying? Yes, so this is what the assessors will see. Right, for collaborative applications, IFS will highlight to the lead applicant any partners who have outstanding project finances to complete. All finances must be included in the application before the lead applicant can submit. It will also check your research participation costs are within the required limits, not so much in this competition because we're only allowed the 50%, so we need to be aware of that. And just to say that it doesn't validate the project costs. If you do put project costs that are over the limit of this competition, it will allow you to put the application through, and it won't highlight anything, so it's up to you guys to double check that you are within those limits of the competition. Right, you are able to review your application before submission. So all sections must be marked as complete. As I said, as you go through, just mark every section as complete. You can go back and edit as many times as you like. You can send it off to people to have a look at it and come back. You can review it time and time again. But once you have pressed the button, that's it, it is submitted. And as Laura said, the deadlines are absolute. So it's noon, 12 o'clock. We see a lot of applicants who complete the application but don't complete the final step. So please ensure you click Submit Application. We have quite a lot of applications that sit at 100% and they just forget to press this button, and there's nothing we can do once the 12 o'clock has gone past. The lead will receive a confirmation email after submitting. This is a really important, I should say, exciting application. So this is why we're saying submit your application early. We're able to track site usage and submission uploads. So this table shows the number of applicants submitting their proposals each hour leading up to the noon deadline. As you can see, the majority of the applicants leave it to the final hours. So you can see there the amount of applications that we have. We get loads and loads of queries through. If you're going to have a technical issue or you're not sure about anything, I just cannot stress enough, please leave plenty of time to ring up customer services and get that sorted out, so at least you can submit your application. Okay, this is what you'll see if your application has been submitted. IFS will send the lead applicant an email to confirm the application has been submitted. It will then inform you what happens next, including notifications and feedback dates. You may print your submitted application at any time. So this is what your dashboard will look like. Those that are new to us, it will show the applications that you have submitted, the ones that are currently going through, if you've been with us before, that are currently going through the system, whether it be assessment or whatever, you'll be able to see the progress of all your applications there. Okay, assessment. Your application is assessed, so this will include a scope check. It's then reviewed by 5 independent assessors. The feedback collation is done and then put into a final score, and if there are interviews, we go through to interviews, but not in this one. Assessors tell us time and time again that they want clarity, detail, justification, and to see that the applicant has presented a viable opportunity for growth with exciting innovation where public funding will make a real difference to developing their idea, and that they have the right people and the right approach to run a successful project and exploit the results. Please answer the questions in the guidance so the assessor can award you the maximum marks. Even if you don't have a fantastic idea, even if you have a fantastic idea, which of course you will do, if you don't answer the questions, you won't score very well. Hang on. Make sure your application reads well. You want to keep the assessors engaged and interested in your proposal and get them very excited about your idea, because they will be reading lots and lots of applications, so we need yours to stand out, obviously, to get those maximum marks. It won't go to hang on a minute, it won't go to the next slide. Oh. Assessor feedback. The lead will be notified when the feedback is available. They then go into their IFS dashboard to view the feedback, and then it's up to the lead to disseminate that across the group if you do have a collaborative group. You'll all be successful, I'm sure you will. So project set up for successful applicants. These are the project setup stages that need to be completed by partners within 30 days. You can start the project setup as soon as you've been notified that you're successful, and projects should start within 90 days. If they don't start within 90 days, we can withdraw the funding offer. We no longer issue a conditional offer letter after notification, as organisations are signing up to our T's and C's as you submit our application. The lead has visibility, the progress of all the partners, so has a responsibility of pushing them through. The lead will need to provide a collaboration agreement, an exploitation plan, and each partner should provide their bank details and a finance contact. Very, very important that, so you must put those in as soon as possible, otherwise we can't contact you if we've got any questions. We will assign you a monitoring officer who will be your main point of contact throughout the project. We'll also review your finances to check your costs are eligible and the businesses involved are legal entities and can meet their match funding requirements. Okay, if you're successful and start your project with grant funding, you need to be aware that we pay your claims quarterly in arrears. So if you're a small organisation, it can be wise to manage your cash flow. It can catch small companies out, as projects do incur significant costs up front. The pattern of claim payments can impact on cash flow, which we already know. So another thing to bear in mind is that all costs have to be incurred and paid between the start and the end date of the project. You cannot claim for costs before the project has received confirmation to start or after it's finished. That is it. That was an awful lot of information. As you know, this will be going up online anyway. If you do have any questions after this session, whether it be on process, finances, anything on scope, please do put them through to our customer support services. They have a full audit trail, so all your questions will get answered, and they go through to the correct team to make sure they get the right answers for you. Okay? And like I say, that there's the email address, we've got the KTN, and any other competitions, anything else you'd like to look at, there's the Innovate UK website. So thank you very much. I don't know if anyone's got any questions. Nice questions.
Yes, so thank you very much, Julie
no
and
problem.
Laura. Obviously, there are some issues around the funding mechanism for this particular competition. Clearly, lots of very detailed guidance that you've been given, but I'm sure there will be questions either today or afterwards. And I think I saw a hand go up in the room just there.
Hi, Andrew Cowan, Future Care. I did the application, and I found the application process very difficult to work collaboratively. I made the suggestion to KTN that the application process should be put in a straightforward Word document which enables people to do track changes and a lot more functionality that you've got on the site. Also, from a learning disability point of view, I think it's only fair that you do so. on the basis that it makes life an awful lot easier for people to collaborate a lot easier. I'm sure you're not able to do that for this competition, but as a future initiative, if that could happen, it would be really helpful. The website is much better than it was before, and that's an advantage. But if you could take that suggestion on board, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely, yes. Sorry, I was going to say, we are aware that some people, there are people out there with educational needs and learning disabilities and such like, so as in reading the text and things like that, but we do offer a service. If you do have issues, please do come through to our customer support services. We've got a fantastic HR team that can actually provide support for anyone having any issues actually inputting or doing anything with our online service. We are aware it is online. Our old system used to be Word documents, and it used to have track changes. It causes massive issues because obviously you're sending it to different companies, everyone's putting it just got too confusing. So we feel this is a much easier solution, and all the information is available on one page, so you've got the guidance, the scoring matrix, everything there.
Sorry, I can have the conversation with you offline, but
Yeah,
you don't have to complete the process online. You can have a separate document, then get everything in, your ducks in a row, and then cut and paste, which makes life an awful lot easier.
It does. We were hoping
We have it
the
on
fact,
that,
yeah,
offline.
it does. I agree. It can do for some people, but we've tried to make it easier. IFS is hopefully an easier system to use.
Oh, excuse me, sorry.
Hello, I'm Michael Wilkinson. I just wanted to. Who is the person who asked the question? Where are you? I'm not sure who was asking. Okay, I just wanted to say that my workaround, and a lot of people who submit these applications, is to put a document on Google Drive, and then because that allows for collaboration, and it doesn't have the problem that you're talking about with the Word document version control. But I'd be happy to have a chat with him to explain how that's done. But I've done loads of applications and won several grants from Innovate UK, and this is what we normally do when we collaborate. We use Google Docs. And then once we finalize that and freeze it, we copy and paste it into your form, and that works really well. I think your application form is really good.
Good. Thank you. I know it doesn't work for everyone, but thank you very much. That's a very good point.
Thank you. I know this point has been touched on a few times, but I'd just like a bit of further clarification about how universities can be involved with this, because an SME may want to make use of a clinical trials unit, for example, which operates out of a university, and of course universities will have their enterprise arms, and so where the VAT is different. Is it feasible for a university to be involved in that way, or is the only way that there could be a collaboration if an academic, for example, was seconded to the company, and then the payment would be made by the company and not by the university? Because I noticed in the example you gave at the University of Bath, it was all 0, 0, 0, 0 for grant funding. So I'm just wondering if this is an opportunity for the universities or not so much.
Ian might answer that one.
Yeah, this is really a competition for companies which have got a product which they're going to sell. I mean, clearly, if a university is in a position where they can facilitate that evidence collection process, then that would be fine, and there'll be costs associated with that, personnel costs, that they might be able to do that on a subcontract basis. But I think we're really looking at companies being the lead applicant and the sole applicant in this case. But we do have lots of other support which is available where academics can participate as so I would say probably not so much in this case, but you know, we'll see in different applications.
Okay, I believe we have a question online via Marcel at the back, and then a couple more questions in the room.
Yeah, so this question is from Matt Kelly, and his question is, would medical scan costs, e.g. MRI, be eligible costs or in this competition?
I think that's Ian again, sorry.
I think it's costs associated with that evidence collection. If you need to evidence the efficacy of that product over and above something which will be done through a clinical delivery, and it requires a particular scan cost, then potentially it could be. I think the question would be whether that was something which was part of the normal clinical pathway, or whether you're actually requiring an additional scan to evaluate something. It would be on a case-by-case basis, I think.
This is probably for Ian as well. With regards to CE marking for the deadline, if your product is going through CE marking and won't be completed by the deadline for this kind of competition, can you still apply for it on the basis that you'll get CE marking after the deadline?
No. Round 3 is what you should be aiming for. I mean, the problem is that what we don't want to get in a position where we are awarding funding and for whatever reason you've unable or been delayed in getting that application, because we really are looking at products which are available to be marketed. So if you're not ready yet, wait until you are, and then we definitely will be having further rounds of this competition.
Okay.
Hi there, Mike Sullivan, University of Leicester. With respect to subcontracting out to universities, I'm imagining it's exactly the same answer then for all the work that's being done in the NHS?
Yes.
It's all going to be on a subcontracted basis?
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. A couple more questions in the room, and I think one online in a moment as well.
Yeah, hi. My name is Joseph Spear from MServe. We're a British startup. We've come off the end of a 5-year R&D program. We've gone through clinical trials with UCLH, and we're ready to commercialise our innovation. We've not done CE marking yet, but we have a plan to get registered for Class 2B medical device for the software and for the solution. Do we still qualify? And if so, are we still eligible? And if so, are we able to assign some of our direct costs for the Class 2 application?
No.
As part of the...
No. So this is really to support people who are at the end of that process. So when you've completed the whole development process, you've got all your certifications in place, and you want to get to that adoption phase through to get the NHS to buy this product or to use the product, then that's when you need to be applying for us. But one of the things about the afternoon session is about looking at the additional support, because I think it's very important that developers engage as early as possible with the various support mechanisms so that they can plan that adoption phase as smoothly as possible.
Okay, well, we have active service evaluations with BARTS and with a number of other hospitals, both in UK and overseas. So do we still not qualify?
You won't qualify for funding under this competition. There may be other forms of support or other support mechanisms, but until you've completed that process and your product is in a box and ready to ship, then no.
So fully CE-marked?
Fully CE-marked, fully cut and dried. This is very much that last step just to get you that adoption process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. One very patient question in the room, and then we'll come to... Oh, no questions online, just a moment.
Thank you. It's rather a broader question. I notice on the presentation salary, you used a 50k figure. Is there a cap on salary? And I'm thinking in this connotation, if you see the job ads for digital scientists, engineers and the like, that may not be sufficient.
So we have benchmarking elements. So if you have a particular request, and that would be something which we would do potentially after we'd awarded the competition, if you've been made the award, they would look and see whether the salary costs were appropriate. If you can justify them and you're comfortable that you can justify them at the time you make that application, that you need this superstar salary, then and you really can justify that when we come to our project setup process, then that shouldn't be a problem. But if you would like some idea or guidance, then our customer support team should be able to give you some ideas of what those benchmark figures are.
Okay, do we have any more questions in the room? Yes.
Is there any way that you have a resource or a facility that enables people to collaborate with other leads on this particular initiative, or for that matter, other initiatives?
We wouldn't expect necessarily it to be a collaborative relationship. We might value working with other partner organisations, but this is really about the company developing the final step to develop the value around their product. So in this particular instance, no.
In other instances, is there something similar or something?
Most of our competitions require a collaborative element.
No, I was wondering whether or not you have a database where people can express an interest and work with others who are looking for collaborators or support services.
So we run a number of networking events which allow people to find suitable collaborators, consortium building events, and I'm looking at my colleagues in the KTN that is their reason for existing, is bringing people together and supporting that innovation process by making those appropriate linkages.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and just to follow up on that, where we're aware of other groups who are looking for a particular collaborator to add to their consortium, we can certainly help with making those links. I believe we have a question online now, Marcel.
Yeah, this is a question from Matt Kidd, and his question is, can you help distinguish this funding from NHS EME, which is efficacy and mechanism evaluation?
So we see this as a complementary strand. We don't look at this as overlapping. I'm not absolutely familiar with the EME funding criteria, but we just see this as an extra pot of money which is specifically helping small product developers in this area. And given the volume of funding, I think you have to consider this as somewhat of a pilot project in terms of looking at how much impact that would be. And one of the things I would reiterate is when we do make these funding awards, we'll be looking to evaluate the impact. So if you do get the funds, one thing we will be doing is coming to you and asking what's your situation now, and then we'll be coming to you in a few years' time and saying, what was the impact of this funding? Because it's only by justifying and collecting that information that we can justify future public money being put into this kind of support mechanism.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there are any more questions online just at the moment or from the room. Just before we move on, just an observation from myself, really. It was very helpful to have Laura and Julie's explanation. One of the issues we sometimes see is that people expect that the IFS will auto-check amounts that are put in. I think you made it clear that you should always check that you've populated it correctly and not rely on the system to correct that for you. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura and Julie. And I believe we're now back to Ian to run through the feedback from round one and lessons learned.
Yes. So and here I'm going to reiterate. Now I know that everyone online and in the room is extremely competent and very good, but clearly when we look at the applications that we had in round one, and there were some excellent applications, and we funded a number of really interesting projects over a diverse range. We also encountered some particular issues. And these issues are not confined only to this competition, but they also relate to a more general issues about why applications are unsuccessful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the outcome of the competitions were, some specific lessons learned, and then some general aspects of the assessment process. So I'm just going to reiterate some of the elements around the assessment process and the application process, but from a slightly different perspective. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what our expectations are as Innovate UK once we've given you that grant, and so that it just doesn't come as quite a surprise, because I think people who've not had our funding before find that our reporting processes come as a little bit of a shock to some people. So round one opened on 29th of January earlier this year, and there was £1 million total funding available. We had 25 applications, of which 12 were ineligible, and I'll talk about those reasons. 13 were put out for assessment and 8 awards were made. And the total funding is not absolutely finalised, because we're just going through those due diligence checks and going back and checking on people's salaries, those kind of things. But it's around £500,000. So there was money in the pot available. If we'd had more high quality applications, we would have been able to fund more companies at that time, which is one of the reasons we want to run this briefing. We want to see, look, this funding is here. If it's suitable for you, and there's only suitable for a subset of companies, that there is this support available. And looking at the applications, and you can find the titles and the companies that we funded on our public funding database, which lists every application, every funding grant call we've ever made. You can see that there's a diverse range of applications. So medical devices, some diagnostic tests, some digital products. So a really good range of products, just not enough of them. We would have liked to have seen twice as many, 3 times as many applications there. And that's one of the reasons. So we encourage you to apply. You'll ask what your chances are of getting it. Clearly, it's very difficult to study. Firstly, you need a good application, and then you also need to encourage other people not to apply, because it is a competitive basis. We fund the highest quality applications. So if in the next round we get 100 applications and we get 50 really good ones, then it's going to be hard. It's impossible for me to judge or guess what your funding chances are for the next round. So why were we weeding out these products? Well, as we talked about, products not being CE marked. So that may be CE marked because they didn't feel it was appropriate, or it was in process, or maybe it was CE marked, but they just didn't say it on the application. It's a whole range of things. Or they just told us they didn't need it, which was good, but not helpful. There were some applications which talked about product development. So they were saying, well, we've got this concept. We'd like to do this. We just need some money to do it. That's great, and I'm really pleased, and it sounded exciting. What they wanted to do was, remote monitoring systems, but it's not in scope for this competition. The other way that you can rule yourself out really effectively is to just ask for the wrong amount of money. So if you ask for 200, you say, I'm doing this project, its total project costs £255,000, you're out. And we had several applications which were outside those limits. Clearly, just look at the limits. I know that. Percentage grant claimed. We had a whole range of percentages claimed. A lot at 70%, so I think there was a bit of cutting and pasting from previous applications. And we had a whole smattering of different ineligible costs, some which would be ineligible in this competition, but some which would be ineligible in any competition. So bear that in mind. If we're looking at finished products, and we're looking at something which is CE marked, if you're applying for patent costs, why are you doing that? You finished the process. This is apply for what you need to deliver the aims of this particular competition. So we've said noon by the closing date. That's hard deadline. I get people ringing me up often on competition deadlines saying, can't you make an exception? And of course I can't. I cannot make an exception because I have to be seen as neutral. We stand apart from the assessment process. I don't assess the applications. I review them for scope, but we rely entirely on our assessors for this. They will comment on each an individual response, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. We brief our assessors, so we tell them what to look for. We look through that competition scope, so we say, is it CE marked? Is it going to have significant impact? Have they evidence that they've talked to people in NHS or the Academic Health Science Network? If they haven't got that, they won't get a good score. We give them a quality matrix, so we ask them very specifically, and I'll talk about this. We say, have they answered the question? If they've answered it fully, and they've answered all the bits that we've got, that you've said, and that it's not hidden, it's not a secret process, the assessors see the questions and the bullet points that come under it. They say, have they answered those? Yes, 9 or 10 out. If they partially answered it, or nearly, pretty good answer, 7, 8. If they get less than that, we look at funding applications which score 70% or more. So 7 out of 10 on average across the 10 questions. We draw a quality line. Below that line, we will not fund. Above that line, it's a competitive process. So it's as many other applications get that. Look at the feedback. We do look at that. There's an interview. There's no interview there. Right. So make sure it's in scope. We can give advice on scope, and we're more than happy to give advice on scope. If you're asking, can we look at your application form, we can't do that. But if you're very nice, and I know that the KTN don't have limitless capacity, so there are capacity constraints, but if it's your first time of application and you talk nicely to the KTN very far in advance of the project deadlines, it's quite likely that they might be able to have a glance over your application form and give you some feedback of the common pitfalls that they've done. But obviously that depends on when you go there and how busy they are doing other things, so I can't guarantee that they'll be available. The most important question, any of you who've got children going through GCSEs, just finished their exams at the moment, is answering the question. It's simply not good enough to paste in something which says this is the best brilliant technology in the world, it's great, it's so innovative, it's got new cutting edge technology. That's lovely. I want to know what the impact is for the patients. I want to know how it's going to save. And so this is the guidance our assessors use. They see this, they score against it. So when you ask, what is the business need, you really want to be starting, the business need for my project is this. And then what's the evidence, what's the impact? So it's really very simple. I know that all of you will be able to do that, and everyone will do it, but time and again we get applications which don't address this. And so it's really important that we do that in that way. And then finally, it's about being realistic. So our assessors are very experienced. They're experienced, they're drawn from the world of academia and from industry. They can see when projects are likely to happen and when they're not. So if you are doing a 10-site multi-study study with 4 different conditions, and you say you're going to do it in 6 months, and it's only going to cost you £25,000, it's not going to happen. So you've got to be realistic. It's got to be achievable. It's got to be realistic and apply, again, total project cost, grant cost. It's driven into me. I've been with the Innovate for just over a year. The number of times I've got confused about it now, we always say, do you mean total project cost or do you mean grant cost? Because they are very, very different. A bit about our expectations. So we actively monitor our projects, which means if you've got a project which is more than 6 months, I think it's 6 months, we will come and we will assess a monitoring officer and they will pitch up at your office and they will say, what have you done? Where's your risk register? Where's your project plan? It's great you've done the application form, but the first thing they'll do is they say, right, what are your key deliverables? What do you need to get in place? What are your deadlines? And 3 months later, they turn up again and they say, what have you done and why haven't you done it and what are you going to do about it? And they require quite a lot of paperwork, and you might say it's disproportionate, but what we've found, if we evaluate those companies which have had Innovate funding, is they're much more likely to be alive and function and going concern 5 years later. And I'm sure that a large element of that is that rigour of driving the people to focus on delivering what we're asking. We are unforgiving on that. We come and we insist that you've got it. If you said you're going to spend the money by X, we say, why haven't you spent it? What are you doing? This is about delivering a policy objective. Remember, this is government policy to support innovation. So if we're not spending the money, you're not doing the projects as quickly as not, we're not meeting the needs of our government taskmasters. So it's really important that we do that, and we would hope that you'd be able to understand that. So if you've not had Innovate funding before and you're looking to that, talk to someone who has. I'm sure there'll be people over lunch who can tell you about it and moan about our monitoring process, but actually I think it's not disproportionate. I think it is reasonable to ask a level of expectation and transparency, given that this is public money being used to support commercial enterprise. And so lastly, just again, that reiteration, ask for support. As I said, you can come to me directly, but if you go via the customer support team, they will catch up with one of my colleagues. Should I be sunning myself somewhere? Ring our helpline. And if you're not ready for this competition, bear in mind that there will be further rounds of competition, and we will make those clear and they will appear on the website. There might be subtle changes in the scope, and obviously we have that opportunity to adjust from round to round if we're not getting particular applications. But at the moment, the competition, we don't have any plans to adjust the scope. So next round of the competition is likely to be similar. I don't know if anyone has any further questions.
Just in terms of having someone else read your application before you submit, how would you recommend doing that? Do you invite them to the portal as like a reviewer, or is there a way to export to a PDF and then send on email?
Can you? I don't know if you can export a partially written application. No.
So how would you best do that, do you think? Would you give them your login details and ask them to log in, or how would you?
It just... Yeah.
Yes, so just to explain, when people ask us to look over a bid, to get involved in a friendly critique, a bid review, they do typically cut and paste it into a Word document, or more commonly, they're working from a Word document in the first place, and they're going to populate the form subsequently. So it's a workaround, but that's how people tend to get reviews. And there are fee-for-service bid writers who will also look at draft applications. KTN's role is, as Ian pointed out, we can look at nearly complete draft applications, and as long as we're given reasonable notice, and as long as we have people on the ground at the time, we can provide a quick review, a sort of an assessment, a friendly critique of areas we think you might need to emphasise, to look at, etc.
I just want to say KTN were amazing. Matt Chapman, if he's here, he was absolutely superb in support of the biocatalyst at a very late hour with a tremendous amount of commitment. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, KTN.
If I could just add a practical point. We've already had a comment about using Google, etc. But the fact of the matter is, you can go into the question area and just scrape all the questions off the website and inject them into a document. And if that document's shared between all the prospective partners, there is a chance that they might actually answer all the questions. And it's quite clear that a number of questions remain unanswered.
I'll just look to Marcel to see whether we have any questions online at this stage. One question we've had before, Ian, which I know you've already answered, but maybe for the benefit of the audience, was about special designations, where people have already engaged with the innovation and technology payment process, or in future the accelerated access pathway, the implications that has for looking for funding under this scheme.
Yes, so clearly there's a complex landscape for funding, and different products and different companies and competitions. There's the number of mechanisms that are out there, and we've talked about the NIHR EME funding as well. What I would say is it's clearly important, if you are engaged in one of those processes, to be able to justify why you need additional support at this level. This is a very specific, supports companies at a very specific point in that development and adoption process. So if you're on that pathway, you've got to be able to say, look, I need some extra money because it's going to add this additional value. So I'd be surprised if companies who were well engaged in that would want to be distracted by coming into this process. But clearly, if they can make a clear case for that, and that's reason that can be interpreted effectively by the assessors, that would be appropriate. What I would say is it's important to be transparent, because our assessors do search around and will find if you are being funded by other sources or have been promoted in different ways. So we certainly do have mechanisms in place to spot those kind of overlaps.
Okay, any more questions from the room or via Marcel from the webinar? No. So we have a little time until the lunch break now. Ian kindly offered in this eventuality that he'd pull some more slides up, particularly on the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund and the wider activity around funding across all sectors, but including very much healthcare and medtech. So perhaps, Ian, if that's okay, we have about 25 minutes until lunch, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So you have more of me. And if anyone has any further questions about the competition, we can always talk about those at the end, so please don't hesitate. So I just really wanted to give some clarity around the industrial strategy, because I've mentioned it very briefly already, and I know that some of you will have been aware of some of the waves and the challenges funding, and there seems to be a new vocabulary which is coming to the fore here at the moment. And it is confusing, but it's also a very exciting time, because the industrial strategy offers really is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform the UK industry, the amounts of money and the funding available represents probably the most significant increase in R&D funding, certainly since the Second World War. And what we'll be emphasising is that there will be lots of opportunities to engage with this, and potentially opportunities for developers of medical devices, diagnostics, and regulated digital products as well. So it is relevant to you, and I just thought it'd be interesting just to say where we are and where we're going. So I'm getting a little bit of background to the industrial strategy and these so-called grand challenges. I'm going to tell you what we've done, Wave 1 challenges. I'm going to give you a preview of what's coming up in Wave 2, and there's an element around diagnosis, particularly in precision medicine and healthy aging. And then I'll tell you where our current thinking is around the Wave 3 challenges. And right at the end, I'll just reiterate what we've got in current funding schemes and current funding mechanisms as well, because Innovate is exploring, we've had a traditional collaborative R&D program, but we've also got some other elements of this. Our SME program for products which are on the market is one of those, but there are some other things that we're doing as well. So in the autumn statement in November, the National Productivity Innovation Fund got a boost, so it's now £31 billion available for that, of which 4.7 billion, and I get lost in all this, is going to go to R&D funding, with 1.7 billion going to the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, and that'll be the focus of what I'm going to tell you now, and the rest of the money going through innovation and applied science research, so probably being delivered much more greater emphasis on what we think of as the research councils. So a significant uplift by any stretch of the imagination. The sums involved are just gigantic. But I'm going to talk about the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. What is the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund? It's the delivery mechanism, mainly delivered through Innovate UK, but as part of UK research and innovation, which is building on the UK's strength in academia and research and R&D, and it's looking to build the industries of the future. It's not about picking winners, but neither is it about supporting failing or ailing industries. It's very much about delivering benefits for the future, about economic development and growth across and that delivery and growth should be across the UK. This is not focusing on the same old winners. It's about driving growth and innovation across the whole of the United Kingdom. The Wave 1 challenges, so we have 6 Wave 1 challenges. I'm only going to really focus on the top one because of the audience today, on the Medicines Manufacturing Technologies Challenge. So there's 2 elements of this. This was launched in last autumn and has just really pretty much wrapped up now. So there's 2 elements to that. It's 146 million to develop the next generation of medicines, looking at step change innovation in manufacturing processes. And there's also an element around digital health technology catalyst, which was something which was picked up specifically in the Accelerated Access Review as another element. So you can see that bits of the Accelerated Access Review, bits of the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy, that paper to the government from Sir John Bell, are being picked up and delivered through the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. So the industrial strategy overall has 5 key themes for how we're going to transform industry in the United Kingdom. It's around ideas, people, infrastructure, the business environment, and also developing those places, realising that innovation and industry develops in clusters across the UK, and the geography is a really important element of that. Not only that, but it's set out 4 grand challenges. So each of these areas, there will be, when we're looking about developing our ideas for the future, we're saying, well, where do these elements fit? What are the big challenges, societal and economic challenges for the UK? So there's one around AI and data economy, the ageing society, clean growth, and the future of mobility. Now, one thing that gets very confusing is the industrial strategy was published after the Wave 1 challenges were all up and running. So people say, well, where do they all fit together and where do the next wave of challenges fit? Well, this slide just explains what are the wave 2. Has a mixture of wave 1 and wave 2 challenges, and it just focus on the central area there, ageing society. So we've got the wave 1 challenge, which is medicines manufacturing within ageing society, and then we've got 2 wave 2 challenges. That's challenges which are being developed at the moment, and I'll tell you some more detail about that. One around data to early diagnosis and precision medicine, and the other one around healthy ageing. And what you'll notice is there's a cross-cutting theme around artificial intelligence and the data economy, which cuts across the 3 other areas, and it's a sort of thread that joins them all up. Now, when we're thinking about how we've come to this set of challenges, as I said, we've got the guidance and we've got some direction. So this is an independent report, the Life Sciences Industrial Strategy, which was published in August of 2017. A report to government from Sir John Bell and from to lay out what the opportunities were in the life sciences sector. So when we think about what kind of processes are being developed and strategies are being developed, and you want to understand where it's all coming from, this report gives you a good idea of the direction of travel. Clearly, it's an interpretation from an industry perspective, and it's not necessarily exactly what government are going to deliver, but it gives you a good idea of where the priority areas are likely to be. So, I said there are 2 wave 2 challenges to talk about. The first one I'm going to talk about has the rather convoluted title, Data to Early Diagnosis and Precision Medicine. Now, there are 3 strands within this challenge. This is a challenge that fits within a grand challenge. You can see the language all gets very confusing. So we have 3 strands within that. There's one about genomics, and I'll talk to you about that. There's one around digital innovation hubs, which will be coming very soon. There'll be competitions and funding announcements around that. And the last one is about digital pathology, radiology and imaging and diagnostics. So the reason that's in red on this slide is because that competition is currently live. There's £50 million for organisations to bid in to develop centres of excellence in digital pathology, radiology and imaging. And that's 50 million with a follow-up of another 22 million pounds for collaborative R&D projects. So if you've got a diagnostic device or you're interested in imaging, there may well be opportunities to work with these centres when they've been established or collaborate with them. This is why I was saying there are lots of opportunities for academics to be involved with these as well as product developers. So just come back through those 3 challenges. Genomics, as you know, the United Kingdom has had a huge investment in genomics, most clearly through the 100,000 Genome Project. And now we have an ambition to expand and develop that genomics expertise, particularly by looking at starting to sequence the UK Biobank. So that's a cohort of 500,000 UK individuals aged between 40 and 60 who had a whole range of biometric data, and they want to layer onto that genomic information. So a vanguard project around sequencing of those biobank volunteers has started already, but there'll be further announcements of how that's going to be delivered over the later year. And it's not just the sequencing, but it's also the diagnostic tools, the precision medicine and the overlying interpretation of that genomic information, which is so important to add value. Digital innovation hubs. We can't do this without pulling together clinical data. You can't make much development without pulling together the clinical data within the NHS and looking across how we can pull that research together and do analysis of what works and how we can understand much more about what real-world evidence takes place across the whole area. Now, what's transpired is that the more people have looked at this, it's become clear that the data fabric of the UK, and this is the right terminology, I'm told, fabric of the UK, I think it just means lots of very, very hard things to pull together, is much more complex than people had imagined. So they've allocated funding, and we're just in the process, the Innovate UK is just in the process of understanding how they can bring those together as a set of partnerships. So they will develop digital innovation hubs across the whole of the United Kingdom, which will help link that data together and provide interoperability for different databases, but also provide access both from an academic side but also a commercial side to understand how you can link the data sets. And the last thing, where it is announced, is around the digital pathology networks. So there is £50 million currently available as a competition to support 5 to 6 centres of excellence, again across the UK. Probably bulk of the funding going to digital pathology, but an element going to radiology and in vivo imaging. Probably about £10 million funding per centre. That competition runs until the 1st of August. So these are really exciting developments. I would be very surprised if there weren't bids from a number of large centres across the UK. And I've already spoken to some teams who are very excited and have actively engaged in this. This is a whistle. I should say that this is a whistle-stop tour, and if you do want to know more about those competitions, you need to refer in detail to the project scopes, which are listed on the Innovate website. So the other element of the Wave 2 challenge is healthy ageing. And what do we mean by healthy ageing? Well, this graph shows a standard decline in independent living. So the lower line, the sort of purpley line, shows how you slowly lose independence towards the end of your life, and that the quality of your life declines because you're not able to maintain that independence. So as well as improving the longevity, we're also interested in making people independent for longer. And that means independent perhaps in their own home, or independent in a sheltered accommodation, or independent in a domiciliary care. It's about just enabling people to live more independent lives, better quality of life for longer. How are we going to do this? How are you going to develop that kind of technology? Because remember, this is a business-led initiative. How are we going to evaluate that? Well, it's a very complex issue, but what we're thinking at is that we'll have 3 distinct elements at the moment. We'll have innovation clusters, which will bring together different product developers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but particularly this is providing a test bed, an iterative test bed, where people can bring in a product which will support the older individual, and it can be tested, evaluated in a real-world setting, and then taken out, maybe adjusted, evaluated, and then we can bring it in. Iterative testing and evaluation cycles. We want to do some behavioural study. How do we get individuals of every age to take more responsibility for understanding their own health and being more responsible for looking after their healthcare in a remote access way? And then also, how do we actually develop and bring out the evidence base, the great stuff that's going on in the universities, into the commercial environment? So there will be further bids for collaborative R&D projects around that. So there are 3 elements to it. The bit that I think is most exciting is around the innovation clusters, and actually also the potentially most difficult. And so what we think in Innovation Partner, if you look around here, you can see around the circle, there are a whole range, you may not be able to see it, but there are a whole range of the usual suspects. So we've got health authorities, and we've got academia, and we've got trusts. But what about other mechanisms of delivering care in a community setting? What are the role for perhaps utility companies who can come to your door, or the Royal Mail, who can design delivery routes, so that when someone's coming to give you care and get you out of bed, did they travel by the most efficient route? Did they visit the places in an efficient way? How can we bring innovation and efficiency to that delivery of care for older people, which is essential if we're going to do it in a cost-effective way? And how can we bring the products in and services, novel products and services, which will enable that to take place? So I think it's a really exciting time. It's obviously very complex. It's not something that I'm leading on, but it's a really exciting challenge. And I think over the next few months, you're going to see much more detail on that. Wave 3 challenge. So in April, we ran an open call, a very, very open call, which said, come on industry, come on developers, tell us what you want. We've got this desire to drive industry. How can we actually look and pull that industry? What does government really wanted to know how they could support that? So they made a call. They said, if you're a commercial organisation or you want to work in collaboration, what are the big challenges? What's stopping your sector from pushing forward and developing the way it wants to? And we didn't have any kind of preconceptions as to what we got. I had a number of conversations, people saying, well, what do they want? And I said, well, no, that's the wrong way around. It's what do you need as an industry? What, from a commercial perspective, what's stopping you doing better, faster, easier? What's the barriers that you encounter? So what are your grand challenges? And so we've had 252 expressions of interest. Now, some of those, and what I should say is there's a few billion potentially available for that. The total request came to 12 billion with a potential, and this is only on paper, indicative additional funding of 11 billion from industry. So it's good that there's lots of companies that want to put money where it is, but clearly we can't support all of those. So there's a process of filtering and time-tabling. Now, some of those challenges will be overlapping. Some of them will be unfeasible. Some of them will be very focused. We will have some of those bids which said, I'm a company, I've got a challenge, I want to develop this project. That's not really what we want, so those are being weeded out at the moment. And there's an internal process where we're looking at those challenges and we're really developing a short list of what are the things that the next wave of the industrial strategy will be able to support. And what we're aiming for at the moment is a whole range, and I'm looking at my colleagues in the KTN because I know their diaries have all been cleared out for September, for a whole series of workshops yet to be announced on particular topics. And I know that we're going to be very busy in September looking through and doing these kind of expert engagements. Now, I don't know whether they're going to be invitation only, whether there'll be open access engagement events. Yeah, I think that's all to be determined. But what I can say is that it will happen, and we are currently working on a timeline that ministers will be making announcements sometime in the, and this is my civil servant, I say early autumn, November. That's very early autumn for a civil servant. But definitely... Definitely before Christmas, we're hoping to make some announcements specifically about those Wave 3 challenges. So I think it's a really exciting time, and it's good. So I said I'd just briefly run through some of the other funding streams that we had available. So one thing that a very important change that we've made now is we don't have sector calls. We have very much an open funding model. So this is our core funding, which is running alongside industrial strategy funding competition. So the industrial strategy challenge funding is very focused, very targeted, and very prescriptive. Our open funding competition is everything that isn't. So it just says, yes, we want something innovative, tell us what you want to do, and apply. The good thing is that it's always open. The thing that puts people off is, of course, that you're competing against people who are developing autonomous cars and new forms of batteries and things like that. I don't think we've got any reason to think that will make it more competitive than our other funding streams. We will always aim to fund the highest quality applications we can. So I don't think you should be put off because you're going to be competing against other technology areas. We've got a precision medicine technology competition. Not much time to do that. 11th of July that closes. So shaping the, but it is open. If you're really fast, you can get an application in. And as I mentioned, we've got £50 million funding, and this is Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund money, around the network of digital pathology and imaging centres. But these are big collaborative bids. But it may be worth finding out in your areas or looking for partners to find out who's working in those areas. We have a capital investment funding. So we don't only do collaborative R&D. There's a capital investment program around genomics and manufacturing processes and analytics for genomics. This is an unusual competition because there's a pre-registration. So although the deadline is on the 18th of July, you need to pre-registered by the 11th of July to be eligible for that. There's £5 million of capital investment available, and there are very specific criteria that you need to make in terms of when you can make that capital investment and the expenditure. But it just gives you an illustration that we don't just support things by giving grants all the time. We also give loans. So we have just opened a loan competition. Yesterday we opened a loan competition. Now people always ask, does that mean that we're going to give up the grants and only move to loans? Well, no, that's not the case. We see this very much as a complementary funding scheme. So some companies are A grant will be the most appropriate form. A loan might be a much more complementary form for a more mature company, because we want you to pay it back. So we're lending you the money, we want you to pay it back. So if you're a small SME and you haven't got a product, you don't really need a loan, you need a grant. If you've got multiple products, you've got an income stream, but you can't go to a bank and say, please, can I have money to develop this product? I'm sure it'll be wonderful. And the bank manager goes, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, right. Sure it isn't. This is where you want to come to. You want to come to us for that loan because it's about growing existing industries and it's about supporting that. How do those loans work? Well, they work on a commercial basis, but the interest rate is low, significantly lower than you get, and the difference between that rate and a commercial rate is your benefit in kind. That is your state aid support element. So have a look at the competition support. The other thing that, and just moving on to the final competition, is Precision Medicine Accelerator. So this is a matchmaking process. So you're a company, you're looking at a precision medicine type element, a diagnostic tool, but you want venture capital and you're looking for that kind of investment. So we can offer all the money, but it's split. So you get some from a venture capitalist and some from Innovate UK. We will do match funding. So you effectively get everything. The arrangement between you and the venture capitalist is up to you. That's nothing we will get involved in. What we are doing effectively is a beauty competition. We are selecting companies which are investable, and we will put you in front of a panel of investors who are interested and expressed an interest in investing across into that area. And that competition we think is going to open on the 23rd of July, close on the 3rd of August. We ran a pilot last year. It was extremely successful and well received by the companies. And I had a couple of conversations with companies who went through that process and weren't funded, but actually found the process of going up and having to make that case in front of venture capitalists and getting that feedback was exceptionally useful. And so finally, what I can say is, look on our website. It's constantly changing feast of opportunities and funding streams. I know the KTN do an excellent job in publicising that, but it's well worth signing up. I think you can sign up for an alert service on our system so that every time we get a new funding call, you get an email. And then if you're not clear, do use our support services. Thank you.
Stepping into the breach there and for providing that context really in terms of the huge investment from government underneath the industrial strategy that may complement this particular competition we've been talking about today, or maybe something you want to bear in mind for future reference. So we have a few minutes now before we close the morning session. So this is your last chance to raise any questions with Ian and colleagues this morning. I'll look to Marcel to see whether we have any questions online. Very quiet audience online. So, oh, sorry.
Thank you. Joseph Spear. A quick question, Ian, please, if I may. Digital innovation hubs you mentioned during your presentation. How do they differ from academic health science networks in England, the AHSNs?
Well, we're fortunate to have someone from an AHSN to talk this afternoon, and I'm sure they'll explain the difference. But the academic health science networks are really about that facilitation of the dissemination of those ideas and supporting those commercial engagements, so working with clinical partners, whereas the digital innovation hubs are very much a virtual model which is bringing together interoperability of data and data sharing and data architecture. So there are clearly overlaps, but one is very much working specifically in health, specifically with the clinical environment, and the other one is looking at a whole range of data and bringing that together. And some of that sits within the NHS, but some of that will sit within other organisations like Public Health England would have significant data.
Will your digital innovation hubs mirror the existing network of AHSNs?
Almost certainly not, because it will be a competitive process. And AHSNs are restricted to England, and the digital innovation hubs have the potential, and obviously that depends on the bids, to be based anywhere in the United Kingdom.
Thank you.
Okay. Last call for questions. If not, please can I just say, on behalf of the audience, many thanks to Laura and Julie from the competitions team, and particularly for Ian for speaking at great length and in great detail. So thank you, Ian. Hope that's very helpful. A lot of information. The slides from today will be available along with the recording shortly. But please could I ask you to join me in saying thank you to those speakers from this morning's session. Thank you. So that brings our morning session to a close. We'll now be breaking for lunch and returning at 1:30. At this point, for those of you online, the webinar will be closing. Thank you to everyone who joined us online. As I said before, the recording will be made available shortly along with the slides to anyone else who wants to access that. And I guess it just remains for me to say thank you very much for your interest in this competition and best of luck with your submissions. Thank you.